on a daily basis, and I'm talking about Twitter specifically. I think, as said before, occupy more digital spaces. It would be good to create manuals for how to deal with cyber violence when you're a victim, that cut across the different social media platforms, and also to break down and disseminate international internet laws or local internet laws so people know what their online rights are. I've been thinking about the idea of naming and shaming, have a name and shame list of the major perpetrators of cyber violence against women. So if somebody was actually doing the tracking, that would be great. More media training so the media is reporting more responsibly about these issues. As individuals who are online, we need to develop our own personal social media strategies so that we are going about it from a strategic approach, how we deal with our online presence. And what else was I going to say? And just to remember that we all have power, and we need to reclaim and take our power, especially as women, and the men need to be responsible for not abusing their power. And recognize that in every negative situation, there is a gift in it. In the moment, especially as a victim of cyber violence, it doesn't seem that way, but I can testify that good comes out of it. And like one of the things that came out of it was Digital Ubuntu Africa. Another one was really honing my own strategy around why it is that I am online. And so as you see on the screen, you will see this image. This is my logo that came about a couple of months after my experience. I don't know what you see. If somebody could shout from the crowd, what do you see when you look at this logo? Wi-Fi. What?
Spread thighs.
Spread thighs. Vagina. So, yes?
Voice. Huh? A voice.
A voice. So it's all of those things and then some. I mean, somebody said a bumblebee's butt. I mean, it's all kinds of things. But the inspiration was bringing my feminism and, you know, digital media together. So it was definitely a vagina. It was open arms, inclusivity. It was the Wi-Fi. And I shared it online after I designed it. And, you know, somebody said, it's the Y-gina. So there's the Y-gina.
Great, thank you. Martha, you conclude for us, please.
Well, for me, I think that it's important for each one of us to know that you are an enabler and you are able to drive change as an individual. And I think most of the times we always wait for us to be in groups to do something different. It's important because the impact is much more. But I think when you make a resolve as an individual, because you know that issues can affect you directly, because we do live in societies that have certain attitudes towards us just because you're a woman. And sometimes some of these problems are perpetrated by women themselves, you know, against other women, because we have a society that always teaches you that another woman is an enemy because she's out to get something from you. So I think it's all about having an individual resolve, you know, to address the issues that affect the community, and it's everybody around us. I have young sisters, I have nieces, and I don't want them to at any point be in a space where they don't feel safe. So it starts with you too. So when you disrespect a lady online, you know, next time somebody might disrespect your woman, your sister, whoever. So I think we all just need to have a personal resolve and commit to addressing issues. So for me, I've made it a personal point. If I see someone saying something mean to a girl online, I will jump in. Then don't even tell me that I'm not part of the conversation. Because the minute you do something that is demeaning to a woman, I make it a point to come into that thread and give you a piece of my mind. Because that is something that, so that's something that we should all be able to do. Yeah, but the men also have a huge role to play in dispelling some of these cultural systems that oppress women naturally. And those are some of the things that we need to do away with. So yes, you are a man, but a woman being empowered does not make you any less of a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
I think in just summarizing, it has already been spoken by my colleagues. I would think we need more training and resources.
We can hear you and we can take action.
Great. So we've had it all. There's a greater need for digital education. We need to take men along this journey as we curb online violence against women. The lack of cybercrime laws in many nations, Namibia is only talking about the cybercrime now, needs to be, there is a need for citizen engagement in that, especially online citizenship. And as women, we need to be driving trends, like Zawadi has said. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to our amazing panel. Great. Thank you very much. It's been a very insightful discussion. There were many more questions, there were many more hands raised as the speakers were still on stage, but you can always send those questions on Facebook, on Twitter. You can also send them through to me and we'll see, look into sharing them beyond this room. I believe that I heard a couple of questions, rumblings rather, about not being able to ask a question or two. But yes, it's the nature where everybody wants to have a say, where everything should be said but simply cannot be said. However, at the end of the day, the narrative should continue. It should change. We need to work towards changing how women are viewed online and offline, viewed as well as the responses rather that are given to women in various situations. So we're going to head up to tea right now. We'll get back into session at 20 to 12. But before we head out, well, the rest can head out to tea, but we need those participants from the African School of Internet Governance, there are quite a couple of faces here, to come join us at the front, the alumni of the African.
At the end of the day, you're the only one who's gonna be lonely, understand? Cause you only need the light when it's burning low. Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let her go. Oh, only know you've been high when you're low. Only hate the road when you're missing home. Only know you love her when you let her go. Oh, and you let her go. Why did you let her go? Why did you let her go? Staring at an empty glass, hoping one day you'll make a dream last. But dreams come slow and they go so fast. See how when you close your eyes, maybe one day you'll understand. Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let her go. Staring at the ceiling in the dark, same old empty feeling in your heart. Love comes slow and it goes so fast. Oh baby, yeah, you see her when you go to sleep. Never to touch and never to keep, cause you miss her so much and you dive too deep. Forget, cause you only need the light when it's burning low. Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let 'cause they shine in a broad daylight. And she was walking, and I was watching every step and the move she was making. She is adoring, I am admiring her hips and her curves. Beauty is a natural thing, original thing, and a mysterious thing. Raise up my voice and sing. I thank the Lord for a beauty queen. 'Cause your black is beautiful, beauty from above. Baby, your black is beautiful, baby, more beauty in disguise. And your black is beautiful, and your black. I'm loving this feeling you bring me. Like a mood, you could broaden my weekend. Then we dance and dance till the night. Eyes up, for your eyes up. She found past that ego. She don't do like Ronaldo, my sweetie porero, Eminado. She like
is going to look into the state of internet in a couple of countries. We will be looking at, well, my colleague Ashna Kalemero will be presenting a bit more on it. But yes, we'll essentially be sharing with you some of the insights that we gathered over the last couple of months while looking into the various aspects and perceptions around internet freedom in a couple of countries. So as the others come in, we'll maybe give it another five or so minutes as we do a couple of introductions about what exactly we're going to be talking about. I'd like us to think about our own countries. How do our own countries relate back to some of the information that will be shared in this session? We'll be thinking about where, because we have quite a couple of countries in this room with us today. Where does the country stand with regards to internet freedom? Where does it stand with regards to the various policies and frameworks in place to address internet freedom? As people come in, I'd just like to make an announcement that those who do require visa refunds to assemble at the back when you get a moment, so we don't all flood the persons responsible for it. I'll probably chip in a bit later to make the announcements again, but I'd like to introduce my colleague Ashna Kalemera to come and share the findings of the Forum on Internet Freedom Research for the year 2015-2016. Ashna. A round of applause for Ashna Kalemera. Huh? You're on your own on the stage, Shane. You can stand.
Morning, once again, I'm back on stage. Juliet had the moderation this morning, so I'm back, sadly. So I think everyone's back in from tea. As I get into the presentation of some of the research findings we had in this year's report, I'll call to the stage to sit with me. I don't want to sit alone. The very honorable researchers who actually did the work. Just in case I make a mistake in what I say, they'll pinch me and tell me, no, that's not what, what we found. So please welcome to the stage Jean-Paul Nkurunziza from ISOC Burundi, Asen Tungali Baguma from Rudi International in Goma, DRC. Representing the Kenya ICT Action Network, who covered Kenya, is John Walwengo. For Jamii Media, who covered Tanzania, we have Maxence Melo. For the Uganda research, we collaborated with Chapter 4, and Peter Magela will be joining us on the stage. Then Zambia, Helen Mwale. Are you here? She's with the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Zambia chapter. Please have a seat. Any seat. And last but not least, for Zimbabwe, Natasha Stash, where are you? Who's with the Digital Society of Zimbabwe. Kenya. There are copies of the reports on your tables, but I'll briefly run through it because I'm not sure you're going to read 40 pages right now. This is the third edition of the report. So, do you all have seats? So I'll stand. Grab a chair, please. Sorry. So, like I was saying, this is a third edition of the report. I think in the discussions since yesterday, as well as the training that we had since Sunday, we're all in agreement that the internet and related technologies are great enablers of participation online, the realization of human rights, transparency and accountability of states and non-state actors, non-discrimination and empowerment. And they've done well in advancing those enablers that I've mentioned, but increasingly we've seen states trying to curtail those potentials of the internet. So CIPESA we do, every year to document cases of violations of internet freedom, legislative developments in that regard. And the reason we do this is there are not many research actors in this space on the continent, coming from the continent. Of course, there's various other annual research reports, Freedom House reports, and a couple of others that measure media or other trends on the continent. So we do this every year and we'll have a theme. In the first year, we documented legislation and violations that relate to intermediary liability, access to information. We covered privacy and data protection, so all the legislative developments. In the next year, we did a survey. So last year, when I say next year, I meant last year, we did a survey on practices, access, privacy, and safety. Understanding and attitudes of actors, whether they're human rights defenders or journalists, their understanding of access to ICTs and the internet, and their security practices. So for this year, we investigated government strategies in stifling citizens' access to ICTs, whether it was legislative practices, whether it was, legislative provisions, whether it was propaganda, whether it was arrests and intimidation of individuals, and whether it was just, trampling the right to access to information or the right to freedom of expression on the grounds of protecting national security or public goods, like they like to say. So those were the themes of this year's report. So we reviewed, why are the slides not moving? Sorry. So I keep reading. See you there. Thank you. So that's a nice quote. So the aim of this year's report, which covers 9 countries, explores what governments are using to inhibit citizens' access in terms of content blockages, censorship, filtering, infrastructure control, lawmaking, court cases related to online communications, any other ICT activities or practices that monitor citizens' communications online, or how government bodies and functionaries are using propaganda in passing Thank you. And also, the mobile numbers of opposition group officials have been blocked, and there's also a couple of websites, critical news websites that are blocked in DR Congo. Moving on to Zimbabwe, Natasha. Research shows that there was interference during protests in August 2016. I'm sure we're all aware of that. Then there's announcements by various government officials and the president himself about clamping down on social media. Some of the legal defense and human rights organizations that were interviewed indicated helping 120 individuals facing charges related to their online communications. We've heard about the infamous Baba Jukwa, have I pronounced it right? The Facebook page that's mysteriously gone offline since it was very popular a couple of years ago. Then opposition groups. Zimbabwe is an interesting case. So one of the leading opposition parties instructed its members to shut down all their WhatsApp groups and other social media groups that they run on allegations of tainting the party in not very good light. So that's an interesting case of not the state trying to restrict content. Moving on to the next country. So Somalia, as I mentioned, we don't have the research representative here, and I'll explain that later on. But Somalia is an interesting case. Again, you're probably aware that the ICT sector in the country is unregulated, hasn't been for the past couple of decades. And in that context, both state and non-state actors are controlling use of the internet. So the federal government, the militia groups, and the regional governments have been involved in infringements on citizens' rights. In February 2016, ISPs blocked 29 websites on federal government orders following allegations of anti-government propaganda and ignoring journalistic efforts. The websites remain inaccessible to date, but important to note is that initially the ISPs did not comply with this order and they were imprisoned. The initial order had 35 websites on the list. So once some of them had been imprisoned, 29 websites were then blocked. 6 of them, the 6 that remained unblocked, the ISPs did not comply with the government requests for fear of the government not being able to ensure their security against the militia groups. Still in Somalia, back in 2014, Al-Shabaab ordered the blocking of the internet in south-central Somalia, where they have control. And then in Somaliland, which also has a regional government, there was orders to block websites for 2 newspapers in April this year for insulting officials of that regional government. And then Puntland also has 5 websites blocked in October 2015. Tanzania, James. So the laws related to, not James, sorry, Max. Sorry. The laws related to restrictions on citizens' access in Tanzania are obvious. Most of them came up last year. That's the Cybercrimes Act, the Statistics Act, and the Electronics and Postal Communications Act of 2010. And then there's a Media Services Bill that's not been passed yet, but it has serious implications. So those various laws criminalize, obviously, false information, publication of false information, but give undue powers to the state for interception of communications and monitoring citizens' activity online. In the period under review, so the year since our last report, 10 social media users have been charged under those various laws that I've mentioned. One of the researchers and someone involved very much in the freedom of expression fight in Tanzania, as the proprietor of Jamii Forums is a very popular discussion forum in Tanzania, has received 8 disclosure notices from law enforcement agencies asking for user personal data and information. Oh, 9, there are 9 since, also 1 more since the report was submitted from Tanzania. Jamii Forums and Max and his team, being the great people that they are, have tried to challenge these disclosure notices on constitutional grounds. They're not the only civil society organization involved in that fight. There's also the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition. They've filed a landmark case against the Cybercrimes Act, and that remains ongoing. Then in January, there was a ban on one of the newspapers. Many have been banned in the past, and the ban was extended to its website as well. Kenya. You've got a lot of coverage in the past 2 days. I'm going to repeat what's already been said. But yes, the Security Law Amendments Act is very prominent next door in Kenya in government's monitoring of access to ICTs and the internet. There have been some announcements or reports that the government's going to issue a social media law to regulate use in the run-up to elections next year. It's not really clear how that's going to pan out or whether it's indeed going to be implemented. There are no updates on that. 10 social media users arrested or summoned by authorities in the 2 months, January and February 2016. There's also growing rhetoric against sexual minorities in Kenya. There's attempts to introduce a homosexuality law. There was the case of the classification board asking for a video to be taken down from Google. It was deemed inappropriate or promoting same-sex relationships. And then the board has also expressed interest in censoring content on Netflix. The Kenyan government has made one content takedown request from Google for alleged defamation. That request was complied with, but I think you recall from the discussions yesterday, it's never quite clear what the details of the defamatory content was, but at least according to Google's disclosure report, for the period June 2014 to 2015, that request was complied with. 2 other requests were made by the government to Twitter in the same period. Those were declined, good news. 5 others made in the first half of 2015 with a 20% compliance rate. That's to Twitter. Again, information on what that 20% compliance rate constituted is not included in their disclosure report, but at least we know not all 5 were complied with. Vodafone's transparency report doesn't say what information or what's disclosed to the Kenyan government during the period, so they don't disclose what the details on those requests because of provisions in other laws that restrict Vodafone from stating so. There's research that's been undertaken by the TOR project. Moses is in the room. I think he mentioned it in his sessions. I feel like I'm repeating myself, so apologies, but I'm sure you've had all this already. So the TOR project states that the government also made a request to a local service provider, so a pay TV company, to bring down an activist website. Thankfully, they also declined. In terms of infrastructure or access control, Kenya is an interesting place. It's one of the liberalized markets in terms of ICT, very good spread, but Safaricom maintains a lion's share, a very big lion's share of the market. So almost be a monopoly in this case. Next slide. Burundi. So a law to highlight from Burundi is the press law of 2015. Recent ones include the 2016 order that prohibits dual SIM ownership. So as an individual, you can't have 2 SIM cards from the same service provider. If you do feel that you really need the 2 SIM cards, you must get authorization from the communications regulator. That's in Burundi. Then another new law in the same period covered is aiming to provide a single gateway for incoming and outgoing international call traffic. I'll repeat that. A single gateway for all incoming and outgoing international call traffic to and from Burundi. You can let your mind run wild on what the implications would be for that in terms of surveillance. Following on from the protest that started last year in 2015, when the president was trying to fight for a 3rd limit, numerous journalists were arrested, intimidated. Many live in exile at the moment. And there's been a lot of crackdowns on freedom of expression in Burundi since. Rwanda, another one that's featured in all the reports since we started in 2014. the interception of communications law only prohibits interception of communications of the president. Everyone else, they can get your data. So recent developments there, 2 soldiers were in March 2016 jailed for tarnishing the image of the state via email. Those email records were presented in court. And it's not the first time such evidence has been presented in court in Rwanda. Last year, a musician was convicted for 10 years, and evidence from his Skype and WhatsApp messages was also produced in court. Again, you can imagine what that means in terms of surveillance for the rest of the citizens. Several websites remain blocked in Rwanda, and editors of most of those online publications are either charged in court for various offenses, or they live in exile in Burundi or in Uganda. Now home, and we're hosting you as well, so it's your home right now. So the Interception of Communications Act, the Terrorism Act, some of the legal provisions are in place that place restrictions or inhibit citizens' rights online. Recently, there was a proposed amendment to the Communications Act to enable the minister make regulations in the sector without Parliament's approval. So he would have single-handed decision powers on regulating the sector. And then there was the Anti-Pornography Act, which was passed in 2014. This year, the developments related to the act, including appointing members of the committee to enforce the act. And the minister in charge sought approval for $750,000 to procure pornography detecting software. The machine, right? So yes, that amount of money to try and curb pornography. But of course, it means that the software and the machines, once procured, can enable a lot more than what the act is intended to enforce. So we're not sure if the equipment and the machines in country, but he did indicate that it would be here by this month. So in case you've been surfing, let us know so that we try and put some security at the door. Again, in Uganda, and you're already aware, we had 2 shutdowns at the beginning of this year, the election days and also the swearing-in ceremony. And also in the same period, 4 individuals were arrested for content online. The pseudonym on Facebook of Tom Voltaire Okwalinga, which is linked to a lot of whistleblowing content in the country. But also 3 others were arrested for publication of photos of a missing opposition official. Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, again, I'm sure you're all were aware of what the situation is in that country. So to highlight some of the recent developments, there have been 2 shutdowns as well there in the past period, one related to exams and the second to process. Several websites remain blocked, most of them opposition party websites, news, bloggers or advocacy organizations. Bloggers that were previously acquitted went back on trial when government appealed that acquittal decision. The market is, of course, not liberalized. So in that brief summary of what these great ladies and gentlemen behind me did, obviously there's a growing trend of shutdowns, 6, I think I've mentioned 6 across the different countries over different periods, and the 1 interference, in quotes, from Zimbabwe. But key to note is that the governments are becoming bold. Like, you know, they come out and say, yes, we blocked it. What would you do about it? Or, you know, we have the power to do it. So they've become bold. They're not making apologies for it. And they're acknowledging it and defending themselves for it. But also service providers, at least in Uganda, they're becoming open and declaring that, you know, we've been ordered to block. In the past or in other contexts, that's not always the case. Then the service providers that are challenging the shutdowns. You remember I mentioned the case of Somalia. The service providers who felt that the government was not going to protect them against the Al-Shabaab and left 2 websites up and blocked, well, unfortunately, they still blocked some, but they challenged those court decision, the government's decision to block those websites. Although their hands appear to be tied because national laws that govern the licensing regime and also the regulator to order them to shut down have implications on their operations in some of these countries. The blockages also indicate that there's a shift from SMS. Again, this was mentioned yesterday. Previously, on the continent and the region, blockages or content removals related a lot to SMS, but they've shifted to blocking websites or blocking the internet in its entirety. Then regarding the laws, the various laws that I've cited that stifle internet freedom, majority of the provisions of those laws are very recent, a decade or less, in the past 6 years or so. Of course, there's some laws, especially in Tanzania, where they date back to the pre-colonial era. Then, despite reports or indications of acquisition of software or equipment for mass surveillance, the extent of it remains very largely unknown. So we hear a lot of reports, we hear budget figures, we hear equipment being shipped in, but the actual extent of it, we're unable to tell, which is quite unfortunate. Meanwhile, data collection exercises continue, whether it's SIM card, national IDs, and various others, in the absence of data protection laws. But the research also shows that there's been growing trend in cases challenging some of the pitfalls of these laws or government actions. So I mentioned the case of Tanzania, where there are 2 cases ongoing. There's also Zambian, sorry, Helen, I'm standing in front of you. So there's also cases in Zambia where individuals or coalitions of human rights defenders are challenging some of these laws or practices, which is great. That was not always the case in the past. So blockages of websites continues. Rwanda and Ethiopia are the leaders. I'm not sure they wear that hat with pride, but from the countries reviewed, they remain at the top. That doesn't mean that this doesn't exist in other countries, but it's just more prevalent in Rwanda and Ethiopia. I mentioned the content removals. There's trends in that. So it's moved from not just international service providers, Google, Facebook, and Twitter, but like the Tor project found in Kenya, the government is making the same request to private, local service providers. Regarding online propaganda, many countries are hiring tech and media personnel to drive public relations online. So it's pushing out content, intimidating users, cloning of discussion forums, again, the case in Tanzania, and in the use of bots. I had to learn this word from Juliet and the team at CIPESA earlier this year. I'm not on social media myself. So we were doing an analysis of Twitter activity on the period of elections in Uganda, and there were a lot of bots. So I kept asking, what is a bot? What is a bot? I'm sure you're on policy.